Utah's Bitcoin Strategy Reserve Law has now been approved by the House of Representatives and just needs to be confirmed by the Senate. And then we would have the first Bitcoin Reserve Law at the state level in the US. So we're just a small step away from the US being with Utah. The first state has a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Utah is clearly in the pole position here, and the mood among legislators here is accordingly very, very bullish right now. Also, something very unexpected has just happened. Michael Saylor posts a picture at Mar-a-Lago, in the house or villa of Donald Trump. And now the rumor mill is heating up again. Are Michael Saylor and Donald Trump possibly meeting in secret? And what could they be talking about? In the end, it can only be about one thing, and that would be a strategic Bitcoin reserve. But maybe too much is being read into this. But why else would Michael Saylor come to Donald Trump's house or chill at his villa and just hanging out? These are, in the end, very, very interesting questions that we need to answer now. We also now see that the SEC is recognizing the filing for In-Kind ETFs for the IBIT ETF. And we're now one step closer to having In-Kind ETFs. And I've said it before, In-Kind ETFs are massive for Bitcoin. When you no longer have to settle in cash, but can settle directly in Bitcoin, that's an absolute game changer. But first, let's actually take a look at the bill from Utah. This means that Utah is way ahead in the race to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Utah's Bill HB 230 was just the first Bitcoin, a reserve bill from a state that passed a vote in the House of Representatives and is now presented to the Senate. We also have a brand new statement from Dennis Porter, who makes it clear again why this is so massive and could really go down in history if Utah now completely pushes through the bill.
Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Bill has just passed the House in the state of Utah. This is a huge movement that we've been waiting for a long time. At Satoshi Action, we've been working overtime to make sure that these bills actually make it across the finish line. We don't just work on the model policy. We don't just work on getting it introduced. We also work hand in hand with those lawmakers to make sure that they are able to get this across the finish line. This is a huge moment for Bitcoin, as Utah is a clear leader on financial policy. They rank on all types of different metrics. They are the best at so many different things, and now they are the first to get it across the finish line in the House. It's on to the Senate, and then we're going to be seeking the governor's signature. Thank you, everybody who has supported our work. We're looking forward to providing further updates.
So Dennis Porter confirms again that what's happening here is really, really big. We have now finally gone through the House, that is, through the House of Representatives. And now the whole thing goes to the Senate, and then a vote will be taken here. And if this goes through, then we'll basically have a strategic Bitcoin reserve here. You can see it right here. Here you can see the different states. You can see it down here, Utah. This isn't a current statistic, because we need to make a point here since it has passed through the House. Now it has to go to the Senate. So now Utah is in the pole position, followed by Arizona, and then the other states will follow. And that's really exciting, that there's basically more and more support for it. And here the bill keeps pushing forward, and it's becoming more and more of a reality. And even if Donald Trump doesn't bring the strategic Bitcoin reserve, then Utah will just do it, or other states will do it. As far as I know, the bills have already been rejected in 2 states. So not every Senate or every state is as bullish as Utah or other states. But it would be important for one state to go through with this, because if one state goes through with this, then there will be pressure on the other states. And if it passes in these states, then there will be pressure on Donald Trump, and he'll have to follow suit. And that's basically the game theory. There are the first movers, and then you notice, okay, this might actually work well. Then others have to follow because they realize, okay, otherwise I might have a competitive disadvantage. And that's just how he takes his steps. But there's also a lot of criticism because some people are saying, for example, in this bill, the strategic Bitcoin bill, there's actually no Bitcoin included. Here, they always talk about digital assets and stuff like that. And now Dennis Porter is being confronted because he always says he's advocating for the legislation and making sure everything runs smoothly. But there's some clear criticism here. And here Dennis Porter responds to the criticism about having a competitive disadvantage. He says, yeah, but Bitcoin isn't even mentioned in there. So he basically quoted the people who are accusing him of this. Then he says, please, read the bill. Only Bitcoin is eligible. The text of the law can be found below. We intentionally worded it this way because it dramatically increases the chances of the bill being passed. Do you want the Senate to buy Bitcoin? Our approach is the most effective way. And I can't really assess that well because I'm not a legislator or anything like that. But I know from experience that sometimes things are somehow obvious. But in the legal world, things are sometimes different. You have to rephrase things sometimes. You have to present them differently. You have to meet certain deadlines. And a whole lot of paperwork and bureaucracy, and so on. Keep that in mind. And that's why it might make sense to call it something different here. I don't know. There's always criticism about all these things, that they talk about digital assets and so on. And here it's not about Bitcoin, or that they're talking about crypto and not about Bitcoin. But it could also be like a Trojan horse, that when you say digital assets, you just don't have the password. Because a lot of people have labeled Bitcoin poorly, let's say. They think, for example, that Bitcoin is for criminals. Or whatever, you know? And if you call it digital assets, then maybe it's not such a loaded term here. But I can't really assess that well. Feel free to share your thoughts on that. Whether this is just a pretext from Dennis Porter or if it could actually be an advantage to call it digital assets instead of Bitcoin. He also explains that if you read through it and see how it's described here, it really can only be about Bitcoin. I don't think he's really pushing for a Ripple strategy, reserve, or anything like that. But there were also some very, very mysterious incidents that happened here. Because it says here, according to the New York Porter, that Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse is supposed to be appointed as an advisor to the White House's Crypto Council. And that's obviously here. A seriously massive thing is happening here. So on one side, we have people who want to push through a Bitcoin reserve. On the other side, we now have the Ripple Foundation getting involved. There have already been accusations that the Ripple Foundation ultimately wants to sabotage the Bitcoin strategy reserve. And now it looks like the Ripple CEO, or the big boss who usually calls the shots, is basically part of Donald Trump's crypto advisory team. And of course, he's going to be doing some serious promotion for Ripple. And that's ultimately the danger that a lot of Bitcoin supporters see, that there's a really, really negative influence happening here. We keep seeing it over and over again when any professors or such are funded by Ripple. We also saw it in the ARD documentary, where one of the professors was the copier, financed by Ripple. He then, of course, went on a massive attack against Bitcoin. But you really have to look at, okay, where are the incentives? Where are the money flows? Ripple, they basically just sell their own Ripple coins, throw them out and dump them on the market. And at the same time, with the money they make, they then fund anti-Bitcoin campaigns, like with Greenpeace and stuff. So we definitely need to keep a close eye on this. But there was also a meeting that created a lot of bullishness. And here we see the Rumble CEO and Michael Saylor. And they are both here in Mar-a-Lago, so here at the Trump residence. And in the end, a lot of people have speculated about whether Donald Trump is meeting up here. Finally, with Michael Saylor. There was also the crypto ball, where there was basically a prize involved. I'm so hot, I gotta wipe myself off. So there was the crypto ball, where it basically said, okay, now Donald Trump is meeting up with Michael Saylor, because it also mentioned that there was a dinner with Donald Trump to be won at the crypto ball. And so, then a lot of people thought, okay, now they're meeting up, but it seems like Donald Trump didn't show up after all. Then the meeting didn't happen. Now Saylor is back in the villa. Hear from Donald Trump. Now, the meeting could possibly take place here. But maybe it won't be with Donald Trump after all, but maybe with Eric Trump. Eric Trump himself says that he is a very, very good friend. With the Saylor family and all, they've known each other for a really long time. And accordingly, you have to keep a very, very close eye on it, because when they meet, they certainly won't talk about sports or golf, or whatever else, or about tariffs or something like that. But they're very likely going to be discussing a strategic Bitcoin reserve, because that's ultimately the topic that Michael Saylor cares about the most. And on top of that, he's of course meeting with the Rumble CEO, so they'll probably be talking about strategic Bitcoin reserves, but on a business level. In the end, they're talking because Michael Saylor is the one who, well, basically brought in Chris Pavlovich, I believe the CEO of Rumble, who more or less didn't orange pill him, but in the end, he got on board that he's implementing a Bitcoin strategy with Rumble, with his company, and showed him how to buy Bitcoin here, how to basically go about it. They'll probably dive deeper into their strategies here, with Michael Saylor just passing on his strategy. And then it would be interesting to see if Trump or Eric Trump or someone from the Trump advisory team actually meets up with Michael Saylor here. And last but not least, we have a very, very big change that I have already. I announced it about a week ago or so, but that wasn't confirmed here yet. Now it's officially confirmed. The SEC has amended the 19B4 filing from NASDAQ has been recognized to allow for the issuance and redemption of physical assets for the iShares Bitcoin ETFs. If approved, investors could exchange their shares for real, cash, Bitcoin, instead of exchanging for cash. And that's basically an in-kind ETF for BlackRock. And I've said it before, an in-kind ETF really makes the whole thing much, much more interesting. It's way more interesting for investors to have an in-kind ETF because suddenly you don't have to go through cash anymore. That means right now, if you buy an ETF, then I buy an ETF. When I sell it, I have to swap it back into fiat. And then I can put that fiat money into something else. And that also triggers a tax process, because every time I am Bitcoin to fiat or from fiat to Bitcoin, then I have a tax event here. And if you just go in kind, then I could theoretically buy or sell a Bitcoin ETF. And I can swap it back and forth directly with Bitcoin. So I can say on one hand, okay, hey, I'm selling a Bitcoin ETF now, and please send the Bitcoin directly to my TREZOR hardware wallet. Or I just give them the Bitcoin address, and they'll send it to my hardware wallet. And that makes it, of course, much more interesting for a lot of investors. A lot of people have already said that this could be the next catalyst. Of course, that will pump even more capital into the BlackRock Bitcoin ETFs, because that just makes the whole thing even more interesting. In addition, BlackRock also has even lower costs, because there is of course an extra conversion process here with Bitcoin and fiat. Fiat then back into other things and so on. If that conversion process is eliminated, then BlackRock will have lower costs here as well. The few costs that BlackRock can pass on to its customers would also mean that such an in-cash ETF might even be cheaper than an in-cash ETF here. And in addition, there is simply a bit more transparency, so that paper stories are even less possible because everything is settled in Bitcoin. And importantly, this does not mean that it is completely approved, but the application is ultimately approved. That means it will be reviewed, and you can be pretty sure that when BlackRock is fine-tuning something like this, turning it into an application, it's going to go through 99% of the time. So, any Bitcoin ETF application or something like that BlackRock puts forward. So, almost every Bitcoin ETF application, except for like 0.something% or 1% or so, there have been very few failures where Bitcoin ETF applications didn't get approved. We've also seen it with the Bitcoin ETF that the applications went through immediately. That means BlackRock knows exactly what's going on. They're in touch with regulators. They're in contact with the people pulling the strings behind the scenes. And they wouldn't put out an application like that if they didn't see a nearly 100% chance that the whole thing would go through. So it's just a matter of time before this goes through. That definitely has to do with the new Trump administration. In the old administration, it was still a requirement. Back then, it was pretty sacred to create Bitcoin ETFs. At first, it was always about discussions. Are we going to do it in kind? Are we going to do it in cash? And so on. But then the SEC made it very clear, hey, we're going to do the Bitcoin ETFs. But only on the condition that we do the whole thing in cash. Because that way you have even more control. So you can basically do even more. Let's say, yeah, they want to prevent money laundering. Or I don't know, some shady things or whatever. Maybe they just want to tighten the regulations here. That was the official excuse, that they just want more control, more oversight, more monitoring, and stuff like that. But that's very likely going to be avoided here. So, it's likely going to happen here first with BlackRock. Then probably other ETFs will also be. Following suit will probably make the BlackRock ETF even more interesting. BlackRock already had the most assets. Under management is likely to further strengthen BlackRock's pole position. Because BlackRock is going to be the first ETF here, with clients, and the others will have to or should eventually follow suit. And that's basically the crazy story that's going on right now. And if you still want to buy Bitcoin now, I'll give you a link below to 20,000 Bitcoin, where you can easily and safely buy simple Bitcoin. Here, you can use the code Bitcoin Hotel to get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Guys, let me know if you're feeling bullish too. Or do you see all of this a bit skeptically? What's going on right now? See you soon. See you later. Peace out.